So I promised that I would do a video that deals with resources that people can use if they want to learn more about the Christianity that's exemplified by Walter Brueggemann's theology. I just finished up his work Out of Babylon, which I highly recommend. But this podcast that's up on the screen there, the Magnificast, is something that I've found really helpful. And it's there's quite a bit of substance to it, and that's part of what I'm looking for. Now, the name would suggest that it's a Catholic podcast, but it's not. And in fact, I kind of recall both guys that run this podcast saying that they weren't Catholic, but then when I'm looking at the descriptions here, one of them is, or at least that's what it says. So it's run by Matt Bernico, who is an independent journalist and scholar with a PhD in media studies, and his research and writing focuses on media, politics, and religion. And the other is Dean Detloff, and he's a Catholic PhD candidate at the Institute for Christian Studies, where his research deals with the intersections of media theory, religion, and politics. This one would be a good example: capitalism, socialism, and communism 101. I mean, part of what they're doing is they're just exploring what is kind of considered taboo, I guess, in mainstream Christianity, which is the intersection between Christianity and leftism. And I think that's interesting. Generally, I like doing it because I think that for too long, Christianity has been politicized, overly politicized. And one way to kind of like pry it out of its politicization is to be able to imagine it with different kinds of politics and realize that the type of politics not actually at the core of Christianity at all. And that maybe a better question is, given the current needs and Christian values and convictions, what is the best political avenue of the moment that a Christian ought to support without bowing down to, the ideology as if it's some kind of God, which, as you know, that's been my chief complaint about many Christians of late. This is Damien Garcia.
Crowd of people rushing Area 51 is ridiculous is the same reason we often think people who are labeled SJW are ridiculous. Their primary mistake isn't necessarily their politics, but their hyper-individualism. They seem to think that they could change the world by attacking individuals online while keeping the system that creates these individuals largely intact, and ready to reproduce more individuals that you won't like either. My move from liberalism to leftism had a lot to do with the realization that the capitalist powers that be were largely in support of what we call justice today, because they see it as a useful distraction from them. They realize it's really easy to keep people from working against them when so much of the social justice rhetoric looks like being stuck in front of a whack-a-mole machine, whacking every bad person that pops up, sometimes missing, sometimes hitting the wrong person, but there's so many popping up that you have to keep whacking away.
There's quite a bit of material out there for liberal Christianity, meaning the kind of thing that he was talking about there that tends to focus in on particular social issues, identity politics, and things like that. And as he very humorously describes there, that's a whack-a-mole project, and it's, as you know, if you've listened to me for a while, I think that's futile, and it's actually a diversion from both real politics and actually real religion in this case. And so, I avoid that. So, like, for instance, if you check out Yes Magazine or Sojourners, there's some good material in both, don't get me wrong, but they're both in that sort of progressive / liberal Christianity realm. And so a lot of it, kind of, I don't know, I don't want to be too harsh here, but, it makes you feel good. Maybe for a split second, but then you realize that maybe there's really not a whole lot of substance. Now, Damien Garcia is just getting started here, and I hope he continues and puts up a lot more content in a lot of different ways here. So I'd like to just promote his YouTube channel. Think about subscribing to Garcia and giving him some encouragement. If you just Googled quote the Christian left, if you were interested in that, one of the things that you might come up with is the Christian left blog. So, I mean, again, this is kind of liberal in the sense that, I hope you guys understand by now, like when people start doing mainly postering and displays, especially if it's right on their front end, so to speak, then they're kind of like risking the possibility of starting and ending with politics as proclamation, and maybe not getting anywhere or not getting nearly far enough. I think it's good to question what has come to be U.S. Christianity, especially of the conservative type right now, because there's a lot of mistakes being made. But pushing back doesn't look like this necessarily. So I don't think the Christian left blog is probably all that useful unless you're looking for a meme and you want to sort of put it out there on your Facebook page. Actually, America, the Jesuit Review. Jesuits these days are a little different than they used to be, and as you can see there, yes, they have changed quite a bit. And so this magazine is actually pretty substantial. It's got a lot of good content in it. Also, their website, if you just want to do that, is like, it has most of it on there right there. And they've got podcasts, they've got video, they have a variety of ways of communicating with people. So I would recommend them. So definitely check out Brian Zond and the Word of Life Church. This is the Word of Life Church website. There's a lot of Word of Life churches out there, so you got to get the right one. It looks like this. I would suggest subscribing to this because you'll get his weekly sermon, and a lot of times there's a lot there. He's quite good. Also, he's written many books, but the one that I would recommend for people to read for sure is Water to Wine, because in it he tells his own personal story as a once upon a time the sort of evangelical preacher who was kind of fire and brimstone, and then he had this conversion, right, and realized that it was just wrong-headed. He and his wife both kind of changed in and around the same time. They'd been reading a lot, they'd been thinking a lot, and they realized that they had really gone astray. And the book tells about how Zond had to deal with about half his church leaving when he decided to abandon more or less the Christian right and their way of doing things. So he survived, and now that church is thriving, and they are a sort of locus of information and inspiration for people who want to leave that Christian right movement but still be evangelical Christians. Charles Taylor is a philosopher and not a theologian, but his work intersects with Christian theology a lot, and A Secular Age tries to explain how Christianity kind of got messed up over the centuries, and he traces that development, and in the process gives us an idea of what a more authentic faith is, even though that may not even be his main goal. So please check out my my playlist on Charles Taylor, A Secular Age. And if you really have the stomach for theory and philosophy, then you could do no better than read his book, A Secular Age. Also, I've already talked plenty about Walter Brueggemann, so we don't need to cover that territory. But I will put a link to both of the, like Walter Brueggemann's book, which I would recommend, is the one I haven't covered actually, but it's The Prophetic Imagination. Also, I've done a playlist on Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul is somebody else I would recommend if you want to get into the philosophy zone a little bit more. He is a Christian anarchist. But as you can see here, Jacques Ellul wrote a book called Anarchy and Christianity. And some of that I will be covering in next summer's seminar. I'm going to do another summer seminar next year and it's going to be on Christian anarchism, and definitely Jacques Ellul's work will be featured in that seminar. Okay, now here we come to one of my favorite thinkers and one of my favorite books, The Crucified God by Jurgen Moltmann. So Moltmann's story is interesting. I don't have time to get into it, but let's just say that he struggled with and lived through and struggled with the whole German Nazi movement, with the Holocaust, and just having to face the incredible brutality that humanity can dish out to others. This book, The Crucified God, really emphasizes to us that God allowed himself to be killed in this Christian, understanding of what happened to Jesus, that God allowed himself to come to earth, to suffer and to die in the most horrible way, or one of the most horrible ways, in order not to be a substitute for us in this, punishment, this eternal punishment of sin, but rather to heal the division created by sin between man and God. And it shows the true nature of God as a suffering God, as a God that has solidarity with human beings, that is willing to suffer with them, is mutable in that regard, and continues to walk alongside us or be alongside us in this relationship. So it definitely challenges the idea of God as this being that sits above and beyond and doesn't feel and doesn't suffer. And this is the kind of God that is necessary to have if one faces the incredible inhumanity of people and the hardness of life. This is the kind of God that a person can believe in if they are suffering themselves instead of losing their faith. So I highly recommend The Crucified God. It is not easy reading, but your concept of God will never quite be the same after you read it. After understanding God in this way, your view of the poor and the downtrodden and the suffering humanity will never be the same, because they share the suffering of God and vice versa. And their existence is sanctified and lifted up because of what Jesus did, not to be looked down upon or to be referred to as not successful, but to be loved and cherished as redeemed children of God. Stanley Ahwass is another theologian that many people in the counter movement of Christianity quote and cite from, and I will confess I haven't read any Ahwass. I probably need to correct that. And I think that this book, The Peaceable Kingdom, might be a good place to start. So after taking a breather, because there's only so much theology I can do at any one time, I might do that book at some point for this channel. And finally, there's the resources that the Roman Catholic Church has. Now, many popes have written encyclicals dealing with society and social justice. But I'll just focus in on Pope Francis, because he is our current pope. And there's two encyclicals in particular that I would highly recommend. Fratelli Tutti, which is on fraternity and social friendship, and deals with how we cannot have this notion of in Christianity, we should not have this notion of the nation state with these hard boundaries that basically say, we safe on this side, you danger on the other. Do not come this way. Now, I realize that this is very hard. It's a very hard saying, right? Because so hard to deal with in practice, especially in a day and age when it seems like, immigration is just, these mass migrations are becoming hard for many, many countries to handle. I guess the way I look at this is that it does us no good as Christians to basically lie to ourselves and tell ourselves that the scripture and our religion says it's okay to shut our borders down or to just protect ourselves. It does not say that. Now, I think we just have to accept that it doesn't say that and just realize that if we do otherwise or only partly open ourselves up to the stranger, to the person who's a refugee, that we are not doing everything that's required. Now, it shouldn't be too hard for Christians to do this because literally every time you are breathing, you're not perfect, so you're not doing everything that is required of your religion. But I think one of the problems we have is that people want to feel justified and they want to feel right. They don't want to sit in this uncomfortable space of kind of halfway, realizing that they can never achieve full perfection and being constantly called upon to do better. But I think that Pope Francis's encyclical here about how we should treat our brothers and sisters, whether they come from other countries or whether they're the poor, as he says, the poor, the abandoned, the infirm, and the outcast. We shouldn't blame them. We shouldn't call them our enemy. It's not what the religion actually says is okay. And to the extent that we can, we should reach further toward the ideal rather than coming up with arguments for why the ideal is actually the enemy. The other encyclical which I would propose for you to read is Laudato Si on care for our common home, which came before the other one. And it is about ecology, and it's about our environment and what we owe to the world that God made. I don't know if you saw when William Shatner's comments when he came back from hurtling into space briefly about a week ago. But he was blown away. He was blown away by that thin blue mantle. And he said, once I left that and we burst out into the blackness of space, it was death. He said, down there was life and up there was death. And he realized how fragile life was down there. And he sort of haltingly said, and to think that we could dirty that. And then he stopped himself and he edited himself, even after, going into space, because our society is so fraught around this topic. But again, there is no way you can get around the fact that God created the world and he did it. I mean, if you believe, if you're a Christian, okay, we always have to preface, if you're a Christian, there's no getting around the idea that God created the world and that there are certain standards that ought to be maintained when dealing with his created world. And to mess it up unduly or unnecessarily is a major problem, and it's becoming, as Pope Francis realizes here, a huge problem for our future. All right, so I've just scratched the surface of what is available, but yet at the same time, think about how little there is compared to kind of the stuff on the other side at every level in our media and in our society right now. Christian ideas outside of the mainstream are hard to access and hard to find. So I hope that this putting a few of these things together helps.